What's up, everybody? What's up, MGTOW? So in this video, I'm returning to my series on hot versus rich. This section is going to be looking at objections and some of the methodologies that you could use to kind of compare apples to oranges in this sense. Now, some of the objections are my objections, and some of them are just more general objections, which could mostly be applied to most type of MGTOW thought, but I'm also going to kind of look at it specifically within this topic. Now, the first objection, I would say, is my own personal objection to using sexual market value or using market theory to apply to the sexual market. In general, I would say that it does apply, but there's certain principles of market economics that don't really apply to sexual market economics. Like, for instance, the concept of rarity doesn't really apply in the sexual market. I mean, I guess you could say in the sense like fertility is rare, but realistically, if we look at it, worldwide fertility is not really that rare. I mean, women giving you access to fertility might be rare, but the actual fertility isn't as rare as it would be to like raise the price that high. And then, there's other certain traits and things like that that are rare, but they're not desirable. Like, for instance, redheaded people with freckles is probably one of the smallest genetic populations on the entire planet. Yet, there's not really a lot of, there's no such thing as a redhead bombshell or anything like that. And there's not that many movie stars that are redheads or very popular models. It seems to be that, either blonde women or whatever seem to be more popular generally worldwide. And then again, of course, you have cultural influences that affect hypergamy and sexual market value. Because, for instance, an Asian person might not like an African person, even though an African person might be highly attractive to other African people. Or a Mexican person might not like a white person, even though that white person seems highly attractive to other white people. So to just try to broadly, apply the same type of market economic principles to the sexual market, it works and it doesn't work. I guess it's similar to market economics where you can paint broad strokes of movements of large things, but when you start to look at instantiations of individual people interacting, you can't really predict what's going to happen. Now, as far as hypergamy goes, I really have to admit that as far as proving objectively that hypergamy exists is almost impossible. There's so many cultural factors and economic factors and physical factors and personality factors that go into why someone would choose a mate that, again, yes, we can see general trends, but at the same time, in an individual basis, there's really no way to predict who's going to be with who. Now, a great example of this is in both hypergamy and the sexual market, trying to apply it and showing how it's wrong, is Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. These are supposedly the two richest people on the planet, men, and supposedly, according to sexual market economic or sexual market theory and hypergamy, that these men should technically be with the most attractive women on earth. And they're not. Obviously, we can see that Bill Gates' wife is not the most attractive woman on earth. Jeff Bezos' ex-wife was all right, but according to sexual market value, he should be with like a 18-year-old supermodel that's willing to have 20 kids. And we can see that's not the case. So again, like trying to apply these theories so broadly, yes, trends we can see, but on an individual basis, it's just not really matching up. So another big problem with proving hypergamy is the fact that the feminist hypothesis, at least in Western societies, is showing to be true. And why it's true, we can debate that. But as far as the general trend, it does follow the feminist hypothesis that if you give women access to jobs and money, they will stop marrying up as much. And we can see even within the last 10 or 20 years, apparently the hypergamy rate has gone down from, 30% of women were married to someone that was equal or lesser than them to now it's about 40%. And again, we can look at all types of different economic and social factors as to why that is. But the general trend does follow the feminist hypothesis that, as women get more money and more jobs, there will be less marrying up. And it's following that trend. So, we can say that hypergamy is this and hypergamy is that. Hypergamy is a lot like porn. It's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. But to say it's some type of objective theory that you can just easily apply to people or social settings or sociology and just say, oh, well, hypergamy X, so therefore Y. You really can't do that. So it becomes something that's very difficult to prove. And I know it's one of the foundational kind of topics of MGTOW. And historically, we can definitely see hypergamy. But again, women weren't allowed to have jobs and money. So it's hard to prove because there's not really a control group for that. All right. So saying all that, I kind of looked at comparing, hot versus rich in several different ways. And numerically, it's just very difficult. Because, for instance, if you take Coltane's video on the gender attraction differential, which I'll link below, you can see that the way that he analyzed statistics, it's showing that, about 80% of men find 33% of women attractive. I can't see the exact amount because he doesn't have, a line for each thing, but I'm just kind of guessing it's around 33% from where the line is showing, where he's showing the 8 line in the video. So if that's the case, there's different ways that we can look at, well, if 33% of women are 8s, what qualifies as an 8 for a man in earnings? Because see, that's very difficult to kind of ration out because you've got different countries, different cultures. Say, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, somebody that's making $1,000 a month might be the top earner in their entire area. Or, somewhere in northern Japan, someone making $100,000 a year is living in a slum. So that's a very hard way to look at, what would be considered an 8 earning man worldwide. Whereas we can see that, worldwide, men consider 33% of women to be an 8 or above. So you can see how statistically trying to break that down and try to figure out which men in each country and are earning what amount and how many women they have access to, it's really difficult to do. And then I just started thinking about it in a different way. I guess you could say it's a more simplistic way of just assigning a value. It's okay, so beauty is the value that these women have, right? And wealth is the value that the men have that we're talking about. So if you look at these as kind of just values on their own, separate from women, or not separate from, but I guess in a sense as just the value of beauty is something that women have. And then 33% of women have a value of beauty that's above 8. So that's above 80%. So what is the end of beauty? The end of female beauty in this instance that we're talking about when we're talking about sexual reproduction or just people hooking up, whatever, sexual attraction, that beauty gets you access to men. And so therefore the end of beauty is access to men. And what does wealth get you? Well, access to wealth gets you access to wealth. Because in this instance, wealth is an end because wealth is the thing that beauty is seeking. Beauty is seeking wealth. Wealth is seeking beauty. So then if we break that down, right, and we say that 1% of the people in the world have access to 80% of the wealth, while 33% of the people in the world of women have access to 80% of the men, we can see that there's a big differential there, and that there's much more women who have access to 80% of the men than there are men, even people in general, that have access to 80% of the wealth. So right there, again, we can see that wealth is much more limited in access than beauty. And in fact, again, proving my hypothesis that wealth, a man having access to the same amount of wealth that a woman's beauty has access to men, it's just less. It's rarer to have a man that has access to wealth than it is to find a woman that has access to beauty. And that's the only way that you can look at it statistically, really, because otherwise, if you try to break down each country and all that other stuff, I guess if you put it all into a supercomputer, you could come up with some type of statistic figuring out which sex has a more rare thing. But again, like I said, just looking at it from that most basic general way of looking at it, that 1% or less of men have access to 80% of the wealth, and 33% of women have access to 80% of men, and beauty is what's giving you access to men, it seems as if my hypothesis still stands that it's much harder to find wealth from men than it is to find beauty from women. So that's just my hypothesis. I'm sure there'll be tons of rebuttals to this and whatever. I'll be interested to hear that. But other than that, have a good day and go MGTOW.